Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really great review for you from a particular model and even a brand that has really been heavily requested for the channel, but hasn't been featured too often. This particular model in particular, a lot of folks were asking about in the comment section, and it was one that I was absolutely excited to get my hands on. Just had to find the right dealer, and I got this one from Lume Watches, so definitely check them out. I'll give a couple more details later on in the video, but this is of course a Glycine. A little bit about the brand. They were founded back in 1914, but are now owned by Invicta, so that might be not great for some of you, but I'm fine with it. These are still Swiss-made watches, and they really focus on that kind of upper entry-level and mid-tier military-themed watches. They have a lot of great watches within a lot of nice lines. You guys have seen I featured the Airman 18 on my channel. That's still a real staple of my collection in terms of, you know, kind of a GMT watch. But in terms of divers, I've always been interested in the combat sub line, but there have always been certain things holding me back until this particular model was released. Two of the main things being size being one, and the other being the way that they would do the lume and kind of these green tints, and I wasn't really a huge fan of that. Here they've kind of fixed both of those things, and actually even added some more versatility, so I'm really excited. In terms of dive watches, some key common characteristics and design language. When you're looking for a diver, of course you're going to want water resistance, typically through some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. This is the Combat Sub 39, the GL0400, or known as the blue dial model, and it's basically a downsized take on their popular 42mm combat sub line, but now with 300 meters of water resistance versus the previous 200 meters of water resistance. And yeah, again, kind of the key things for me that made me pull the trigger versus other sublines in the past is kind of they've addressed the overly green tinted daylight lume look, and this renders nice and white now, as well as I think the size. I think this 39mm size is actually really nice, and hits a bit of a sweet spot. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. All right, guys, so as you can see, this is quite a looker, and some of you were shouting at the screen like, man, that looks so much like a Tudor Black Bay 58 blue, and I can't argue with you. It definitely, I mean, it's not by any means a one-to-one reproduction, but it does have a lot of the same characteristics, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that many dive watches carry a lot of those same characteristics, and it does have, of course, kind of that big crown construction, but I will say that this is definitely a lot more modern, and you know, they've injected a lot of their own kind of design and DNA into it. It's more so, I think, the size and the colorway that really makes this stand out as, you know, kind of an affordable alternative to the Black Bay 58, and I think they've done a great job with that, because at the end of the day, it's still Swiss made, and you're actually getting it for a relatively cheap price at $568 if you get it from Lume Watches. Of course, the retail price is going to be much higher depending on where you get it from, but the nice thing is Lume is an authorized dealer, so you are still going to get all of the same perks you would get regardless of where you purchase from. So this is all stainless steel. It's brushed and polished, and you can see here, very nice in terms of the finishing. Nothing crazy on the case. It's pretty much all brushed, and then you have polished on the bezel, and then kind of some polished highlight there on the crown, which is nicely signed. You get all the things that you like in terms of drilled lugs, and some of you might not be super excited about the polished center links on the bracelet. I get it. I could do without them, but I don't think they really hurt the design in any way. And then, of course, very pedestrian in terms of this clasp mechanism here. So just to kind of get that out of the way, the nice thing is that it is milled in terms of the folding section, and you know, it is quite secure because it does have the twin push button release and then the fold over locking clasp. You also do get a nice embossed case back there, and the profile is really quite fantastic, quite modern from that perspective. Even though I think looking top down on it, it definitely has, you know, vintage big crown vibes. And then if you were to get this in, let's say, you know, another colorway in terms of like all black with gilt, then it would look definitely a lot more vintage. For me, the blue is such a great, I mean, you guys know my channel and blue divers. I'm a bit of an addict. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of it. Of course, in terms of the dimensions, 39 millimeters in diameter, only 11.3 millimeters thick, and then 46.2 millimeters lug to lug. So this is going to wear really well and be quite centered on the wrist. You do have a flat sapphire with inner AR coating, which does a great job at negotiating, you know, some of that extra reflections. And then especially since it's a flat sapphire, which also does help. And then you do have a unidirectional rotating 120 click bezel here. So let's hear it. Ooh. Nice. So nice action there, and then you can see the man, that coin edge is really, really nice. I almost said sharp, but I wouldn't want that to be perceived in a negative way. It is definitely very well finished, not sharp in any bad ways, but more so sharp in terms of it's high definition. It's very well executed from that perspective, and you can already see that the center links are taking on some smudge marks, probably some light micro scratches and whatnot. Just kind of comes with the territory. The nice thing is with the drilled lugs there, and this having a 20 millimeter lug width, you can pretty much swap this out onto anything and it's going to look really fantastic. I would say, hey, check it out on maybe a gray NATO or, you know, a blue rubber tropic strap would probably be pretty really nice as well. So you do have a loomed bezel insert there. You have the 12 o'clock pip, which is loomed, which is very nice. And then you have this nicely executed brushed finish underneath the coating on that aluminum bezel insert. This actually reminds me a little bit of my Seiko SBDC 101 or SPB 143, depending on, you know, if you're talking international or JDM model, in terms of the fact that it's really well sized and also, you know, I think quite well executed in terms of its versatility. And I think, yeah, it just it speaks to me a bit in terms of being something that can be worn every day, and it kind of checking all of the boxes, which I really can appreciate. Now, the crown is screw down and it's also signed. And then inside of here, you're going to get your GL 224, which is typically going to be an ETA 2824 or a Sellita SW 200, depending on availability. And then they're not going to do too much in terms of, you know, modifications onto that Swiss made movement, but it is totally a workhorse movement, so it'll be just fine. And then of course you do get that nice little embossing, which does have this really cool you know, a pattern, wave pattern, as well as what looks like a little stingray action on the back. So very handsome from that perspective. Again, checking those diver boxes. This is something that I think would appeal to somebody that is into dive watches. And then those that are just looking for kind of an everyday sports watch as well, because of, I think, that really nicely done size and then that really versatile dark blue tone. A lot of times you can get with brighter blues and then they can just kind of be a little bit too loud. I think this is just probably about perfect in terms of that fine balance. And then the great thing is with this, you know, smaller size, they actually did add extra water resistance, and now it's 30 atmospheres or 300 meters of water resistance, which is really fantastic and makes it feel quite professional. Although, you know, you're probably not going to do any recreational diving below 40 meters. It's still great to have, and it's definitely one of those things like, hey, it's nice to have a car that'll go 200 miles an hour. It doesn't mean that you will do it, but it's nice to know that it's there, and it basically means that everything is overbuilt enough to where you don't have to worry about it kind of within your own daily use case. So kind of similar parallels apply there. Speaking of applying, we got applied indices, and then we also do have that printed 24-hour scale, which brings in kind of that military aesthetic, which is great. So kind of that field watch aesthetic does bleed over, and I'm a big fan of field watches and divers. So to have something that has a bit of a crossbreed in terms of those very nice design languages, I think is great. And it's something that is not new to the combat sub. I mean, it's even kind of in the name. And then they also do have the date at 6 o'clock, which has been, I think most folks find that quite preferable. Pretty much either 3 or 6 or no date at all. And then, of course, sometimes they can do some well integrations in between, the 4 and the 5 o'clock as well. But I'm glad that they did it at the 6 o'clock. Nothing special on that date window in terms of the finishing, but it does the job and I think flows well with the rest of the case. Now, the lume on here, Swiss Superluminova, it does glow green and does render quite white during daylight, which again is a huge plus for me. And then everything else is pretty much polished out. You got the polished handset, and then you also do have kind of those polished surrounds on those indices. So it's a good looking watch. And then again, you get back to 20mm lugs. They're drilled, solid end links, push pin connectors, which isn't the greatest, but it does the job. And then again, you might find yourself not wearing this on bracelet very often because there's so many great options that are out there. And pretty much anything that would look good on a black bay will probably also look good on this particular timepiece. So with that said, let's go ahead, get this piece on wrist and see how it wears. All right, now as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, or maybe even closer to 7½ inches, because I am wearing it a little bit higher up on the wrist. And as you can see, although the wrist bone does make the wrist a little bit wider from the top, it's actually a little bit slimmer from the side. So just when you hear me reference my wrist size, depending on how high or low or on the bone, the wrist bone here or above it or below it, I'll wear, it's kind of a different, slightly different size, but I think it wears really well. Open hand there. I think some folks might see this and be like, man, that just wears a bit small, a touch small, whatever the case may be. No, it's not a 40mm, but it is darn close, and I think it wears really, really well. Very, very flat on the wrist. As you can see, nice case contouring. Those lugs do tend to wrap. And you can expect that on your wrist as well. So if you have a smaller wrist, this is really quite ideal. And if you have a larger wrist, I think it's still quite bold in terms of the layout, the spacing, of the dial and everything like that. So you are still getting quite a pop of wrist presence, although it is a relatively thin case and 300 meters of water resistance. That's really good. 11.3 millimeters thick and 300 meters water resistance and Swiss made. That's impressive, guys. Like, they didn't use an especially thin movement here, but it makes you wonder, like, what if they did? How much thinner could they have gotten this? So it is really, in terms of the wear portion, goodness, I mean, there's really nothing to complain about. Of course, the clasp isn't the most advanced or cool looking or anything like that, but it absolutely does do the job, and it is quite svelte and slim in terms of the way that it flows with the bracelet. So you can't really complain too much from that perspective. But look at how flat that lays on the wrist. It just hugs the wrist really well. And because of the smaller diameter, it doesn't seem like it's just hyper flat, which is nice, because you can want a thin watch, but you don't necessarily want it to feel like a big flat coin laying on your wrist. It's nice to have some dimension, right? So there is some depth there and some dimension that you do get, but a relatively, of course, flat and slim layout, which I think is something that a lot of folks look for, especially when you want something that can slide underneath the cuff. So very, very nice from that perspective, guys. But let's go ahead and get this off of the wrist now and get into some lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, it's a dive watch, and you can absolutely see very nice, legible lume from that perspective. Nothing crazy. I wouldn't call it a lume beast by any means. I mean, although the lume is really cleanly applied, it's not, I would say, very thickly applied. So this is definitely something that there is a trade-off, right? Sometimes you get the thicker application and it doesn't look quite as sharp during the daylight, but in the dark, of course, is where you're going to kind of, unfortunately see some of that trade-off. But one thing I like to do is work in some low light transition when I'm doing these lume shots, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself, coming in and out of a building, maybe walking underneath an overhang or the shade of a tree, or just spending time in your favorite automobile. So it is nice to see what the watch finishes as well as the colors will render like in less than optimal lighting, to even include some harsh lighting here, maybe some high contrast where you would typically expose any type of defects within that finishing. But as you can see, very deep high polished center, and then the brushing along the links there, still quite nice, quite serviceable. Nothing luxurious in terms of, super fine, but still very nicely brushed. It doesn't come off as looking machined or anything like that. I think it has a very nice luster to it. And then, of course, the colorway, man, look at the way that the sun ray pattern does play with the light. It does a lot of dark with just that nice high contrast strip, very vibrant indigo blues there. And then you can see the beautiful thing is the way that they've done this bezel insert. It plays with the light in a very similar way. As you can see, very dark, and then you just get those bright highlights depending on the lighting situation. And I think this is just a cool looking, well wearing watch. And yeah, it happens to be Swiss made and it happens to be from Glycine. So it does have a bit of name recognition there. In terms of closing thoughts here, guys, on the wrist, very handsome. It oozes a certain versatile quality not seen in previous iterations. So it just has that extra level of refinement. In terms of model variations, they have this in a 36, 39, and a 42, and now they even also do have some kind of oversized 46 millimeter variants for those of you that are really big into that sporty oversized feel. So the cool thing is they really have something for everybody. In terms of comparable models, of course, this clearly shares a lot of design cues with the Tudor Black Bay 58 Blue, but I think its profile and general theme make it also comparable to something like my Seiko SBDC 101 in terms of it being a classy, do-it-all aesthetic, or maybe even my Zen U50 in terms of that thinness for a very capable diver, although, this is being slightly less capable, 500 meters versus 300 meters, but still very cool. So only about 20, only about 200 meters difference there. Still quite thin in comparison. And then, yeah, it's just, it puts itself in a really great place to cross shop against outstanding watches that everybody loves. So, I mean, when you just think about that alone, if you just think this is a cool looking watch, like, you'll absolutely enjoy it. But then when you think about the fact that you might save yourself a little bit of money, or maybe you're just never going to spend that much on a Black Bay, or hey, maybe you're never going to spend that much. Maybe you're not going to spend, $1,200 on a Seiko or $3,000 on a Zen diver. This is something that I think can give you a lot of that same vibe and same wear experience for a lot less. And, even though this does have some really great comparables, yeah, it's a Glycine, but I'd say it still has about the same amount of brand recognition as something like a Squale or a Squall. So, bottom line, 39 millimeters might just be Glycine's sweet spot, as their 39 millimeter Airman 18 made it into my long-term collection. And, this more recent Combat Sub 39 with 30 atmospheres of water resistance really makes a case for itself in my collection as well. So while the clasp isn't great and, I could do without the polished center links, there's still a ton of value here. And I think it's very competitive against most of the mainstream Swiss and Japanese divers on the market. So again, it makes a case for itself. It is quite versatile, quite capable, quite handsome. yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this thing became a forum darling, you know, or took on a whole lot of success. And then, you know, it pretty much seems like every week Glycine's coming out with new color ways and combinations. So definitely keep an eye out for those. But check out Lume watches if you want to get yours at a really great price. So with that, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do hit like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.